Hello and welcome to the Future of XYZ. This week we have the privilege of speaking with Nell, Derick, Debevoise. Nell, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm excited because, of course, as we both know, purpose, we're going to be speaking about the future purpose, is something we share in common and feel very passionately about. And you obviously have a lot of experience. You're running a company since 2013 called Inspiring Capital, really like looking at, leadership and personal development towards helping people find their purpose and do better for this world we share. Those are my words. You can speak to it more. And you recently launched the PGI, which is the Purposeful Growth Institute, which is a nonprofit adjacent.
Exactly.
It's wonderful. And of course, you spent the first part of your career working in international development. You speak 6 languages. It's pretty impressive. I remember being like, wow, like when we first got introduced, that's pretty rad.
I have to get that to language school so I can leave that in my bio because it's going to start to get embarrassing as my Japanese fades.
It's pretty great. And obviously way overeducated with undergraduate degrees from Harvard, an MBA from Columbia and London Business School, LBS, and 2 masters in education in Rome and in Cambridge, UK. So I think what we want to get to first and foremost, you've obviously well honed your own purpose to come to the place where you are. But what is purpose? Like, what is that definition that we should be working off of?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And it's a word that I think has sadly been a little bit devalued or overused. We'll talk about purpose washing. I know that's a bugaboo that we share. But purpose is really fundamentally a reason for doing something, right? A reason why something exists. Like part of my purpose is making purpose simple and actionable, right? And not this kind of floofy branding trick. And so purpose is the reason for which something exists. And so as humans, why we exist, or as organizations, why a company exists. And I think what is useful as we use and define and guide people through purpose is 2 elements. So one is our actioning of it. And here we talk about purposeful leadership, right? So I think it's important to it's not just purpose, it's how you play with it. And we talk about that as being intentional about the way that your decisions and behaviors have an impact in the me, the we, and the world dimensions. Right. So that's, I think, as much as getting wrapped up in the OED or a new definition of purpose, it's this actioning of it that I think is really helpful. And we can talk more about that framework as we go on, but that's where I would leave people, is really just thinking about why you exist as you impact your own me and other individuals around you, your we, your family, your team, your organizations, your community, and then that broader world, people and planet beyond.
I mean, it's very meaty, and I think a lot of us, especially perhaps in the last couple of years, as people have been forced to slow down, and reckon with some really big challenges that perhaps were not always so apparent. I think there's a lot of people individually saying, what is my purpose, to the me, to the we, and to the world, but organizationally as well, we're seeing that, right? We're seeing corporations, both because of consumer changing, shifting demand and expectation, but also realizing like our role isn't just to extract, as we learned in business school, value creation and money, but in fact, maybe we need to leave the world a little bit better, or at least mitigate our negative impacts. So what is the use cases, if you will, for purpose? There's the personal and the professional, and in the business world, where do you really see the biggest impact being, or is it all the same?
No, I think it's massive in both of those dimensions. And so on the me, honestly, it's about well-being, right? So there's all kinds of research about like how long you live and your likeliness of dying decreases when you have a sense of purpose. Right. And actually, if we scrape away all the judgment that we have about the overuse of purpose and this kind of millennial trend that's sort of annoying and whatever, it makes sense. If you have a reason to get up in the morning, you're more likely to get up. Mm-hmm. And if that reason is like to hit that quarterly sales target versus to reduce obesity and the health problems that go along with it, or racial inequity, or the gender wage gap, those latter are a bit more motivating on a gray, rainy day when you don't think you have any coffee left to get up to, right? So it's about well-being, and I just wrote a piece that I can share in some of the follow-up material, that it's not that it's easy, right? It's not necessarily fun to dig in and unwind your purpose and face the nasty challenges or some of the nasty things that we have done to each other, to humans, to our planet, and think about how your purpose can be to mitigate or improve some of that. And so it's not about like rainbows and unicorns happy version of well-being. It's about like really deep satisfaction, right? It's about that sense of peace at the end of the day or at the end of a year or at the end of life, whenever that may come, that you have made something a little better, that you have left something a little better, right? And so anyway, I nerd out in kind of the Greek eudaimonia versus that more rainbows and unicorns version of hedonia, happiness. But people who want to nerd out can read the full article. I'll leave that there. But I think that it really is about fundamentally that well-being and then performance, right? It's I've interviewed, I shared with you over 110 now CEOs and CHROs from this book that I'm writing about this all, and people talk about the focus, the sorting function that having a purpose provides. I don't do that. I do this. I spend my time here, not here. This is how I show up, not this way. And in a crazy friggin' world that doesn't seem to be getting any less crazy, that's a really powerful thing to sort through distraction and overwhelm.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important actually to point out, which is like, and there's a lot of, as you say, science on all of this, but of course the ability to not just know where to say yes, but how to protect yourself by saying no to the things that aren't going to serve you, or again, further this sense of purpose and impact. I guess I like how what you're saying isn't just about why we exist. And there are lots of words in the branding, world from which I also, come, mission, vision, purpose. I mean, I won't say they're interchangeable because they're not, but I think, we can look at them in similar ways, which is like, why do we exist? And then how does it help you with that goal setting? And so I'd be curious because, you allude to the book. You are writing this book that's going to come out in February, hopefully next year, with Epic Publishing. It's called Going First, and it's about finding the courage to inspire others and to find your purpose. Is that correct?
Exactly. So the title is Going First, an invitation to find courage to lead purposefully and inspire action. Because as you allude to, this having worked in the nonprofit space in very direct service, right? Like literally 200 refugee women and their 4 to 8-year-old children at our center every day where I lived, right? So like very frontline service impact oriented. And now zooming out and back to working with like a marketing team at Kraft Heinz, right? Like super different version of impact, but absolutely still tied to that sense of leading purposefully in the day-to-day, whether Kraft Heinz or UNICEF or anything in between, and really truly inspiring impact. And I think what's important to me, and again, my own purpose is about depressurizing and demystifying this sense of both purpose and then impact. Right. One of the brilliant interviewees that I was speaking with, a CEO of a fast-growing, intense tech company out in Chicago, headed to IPO, and very much the Kraft Heinz mainstream capitalism version of impact, not the UNICEF or refugee mother version. But he said, powerful people think about making change in their realm of impact, not out, or their realm of influence, not beyond it, and expanding their realm of influence.
There was a book written, I think, about this that I can't recall right now, and it was exactly that. It was like, what's your circle of influence, and growing it, right?
Yep. But I think that's really important, again, in this moment when there are crises in every friggin' dimension you could think of or mention, it's breaking or broken. Right? And so it's so daunting, little old me, like my purpose is to raise a happy family. I don't know, that feels unambitious or selfish, or but I think the whole point is like we are only 1/8 8 billionth of the puzzle. And so it's actually not helpful for you to fret or to mingle or to influence these other things that have nothing to do with what you're good at and what you love.
And where you are, perhaps. I think that there's a
And
local
you
piece to
are.
this that has become very evident, obviously, as many of us in the world have faced lockdown, which
Yep.
is like, what is our community? And having to redefine those boundaries a little bit and recognizing that sphere of influence is, in fact, no matter how globetrotting some of us may be, our sphere of influence is still quite local.
And I, I think where you are has gotten a little bit less physical in this world. So yes, I think there's a localness, and it may not be. I don't see my next door neighbor any more than I see my former colleagues in the West Bank because we're keeping safe, right? And so,
Yep.
but I don't think it necessarily has to be geographically local.
I agree.
Certainly, there's a whole rabbit hole of it needs to be deeply known as someone who has experience in international development. But that may look different than, a geographic radius specifically around your home. But no, I think I think it's really important to recognize that it is most powerful to get clear about who you are, what you have to offer, and what you want to offer, because it's that enlightened self-interest that makes something sustainable, right? Anything we're doing out of duty or obligation, it's just not going to last, right? Whereas
Absolutely.
something that is truly rewarding in that sense of deep satisfaction is something that we'll keep doing and do more of and do well. And so we don't have to, there are 7.9999 billion other people to do other things. We just have to pick our little piece.
I think it's fascinating. And I want to jump to the corporate side or the organizational side of this, because what you're talking about is the same thing, right? It's like, what's your sphere of influence when you're, let's use Kraft Heinz or Mondelez or any of the other fast, FMCG consumer goods companies or anyone else. I mean, this purpose orientation, this doing more, this giving back, this impact story is becoming so pertinent in the corporate world. And we can talk about sustainable capitalism or conscious capitalism, but the world, certainly through ESG initiatives, through, business roundtable commitments, there is a fundamental recognition that is rising that corporations, organizations have an obligation. So are there any, as you've done these 110 interviews for the book so far, are there any leaders who have really stood out to you? You just gave one example. Are there other leaders who have stood out to you in terms of really kind of honing that sense of purpose and really having an impact in meaningful ways?
So many. I mean, truly, it has been the biggest joy and pleasure of my life to do this work, to have these conversations and do these interviews. It's just been such a treat. And so all of the 110 are absolutely, that's why we've talked, right? Is that they are on the front edge of this. And each of them is referring me to at least 2 to 5 more, which is why the book is being delayed, because there's all this cool input and energy and excitement about it. Look, I think that the theme of all of them, and certainly I can pull out a few examples, but it's the point that Anand Giridharadas made a few years ago in Winners Take All, that you shouldn't have to give back if you didn't take too much to begin with. Right. And I think that post-COVID, that has become even more visceral for us and what we expect of our employers and the companies that we buy from. And so I think that's what these leading edge people are doing with their companies, whether that's Accenture, whose CEOs of global and North America I've spoken with, or whether that's, Black and Bold, this small coffee roaster out in the Midwest. And so I think it's like the future of purpose to me fundamentally is about integration and infusion. It is not a brand. It is not a label in your cafeteria wall or on your signatures or your annual report. It is a lens through which your operations, your financials, your people operations, biggest and most of all, your product design, your marketing, every facet of your business has this filter of why do we exist?
Yeah.
What are we here for?
It's funny because I talk about it a lot. I've been saying the same thing, and this is why you and I, have been friends. I call it values, right, and
Yeah.
a personal level, and and I think purpose and values are different, but it is the lens through which you assess life. And I
Yeah.
think for business to get everyone rallied behind values can be intangible, right? Whereas a purpose, everyone can get behind, and create this kind of tidal wave of impact. But I want to touch on this. You said something that I think is really interesting, especially in a world where we're seeing the inequity between the haves and the have-nots just simply growing. I think something just came out. It's like, in 1975, the average CEO earned 16 times what their average worker did. And this last year is 265 times, I think, are the numbers that I read. If you don't take too much, you don't need to consciously give back. Well, we're living in a world where most corporate entities are taking too much, whether that's in the form of, money off the top, or, resources from the middle. And so what do we think are some of the ways in which through the book you offer frameworks for helping, organizations and individuals find their purpose? What tools would you recommend to these organizations that are in fact probably taking too much?
Yeah. So the fundamental framework for me and a lot of the leadership development work we do is this me, we, and world, right? And so it's intent, I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. And so Mark Twain is a favorite, and his quote that if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter, right? We spent 9 years refining and tweaking and working deeply, hundreds, tens of thousands of hours with individuals and teams and audiences, and got down to me and we and world, right? And why I love it. And as we've been working with leadership teams and new managers and groups, it is so simple. It's so universal, right? And so it's not hard to remember. You don't have to like scramble and pull out the paper when you're in a meeting and be like, hang on, direct report, let me refer to my 82-step framework. It's like, it's universal, right? So your values as a company might be one thing, and they might shift a little on an individual level, right? Or your business lines might shift and pivot during a global pandemic. But there is always something to be considered in terms of the me dimension. How does this affect me as an individual, but also the other me's around me as individuals? How does this affect our team in terms of profitability and survival, as well as functioning, as well as trust and all those things? And how does it impact the world, right? And so that there's myriad ways that we drill down in terms of how does that play out in difficult conversations or giving feedback or product strategy, and so we can go there in deeper work. But just having that shared language start to really get infused around the company creates this sense of the really basic version of purpose, which sometimes it's been coming up in interviews as we've agreed it's the grandmother test, and you can make it the grandchild test or the grandfather if that was more resonant for you. But would you be proud to explain the decision you made today to your grandmother?
Right.
Like,
Simple.
and not to devalue the work that you with your technical expertise or other people do on supply chain and carbon credits. Like the world is complex. And so there is very complicated, complex technical work to be done as you go down the pipeline. But my purpose is about switching on and infusing and integrating this like me, we world, so that every day, every minute, every hour, every quarter, as you're doing all the things of running a meeting or building strategy or interacting with an unhappy customer or giving a difficult feedback session, you're doing that 10-second or 10-minute check on the me and the we and the world impact.
I'm a sucker for easy to remember frameworks. And of course, like, the me, we world, which actually I'm hearing about for the first time as your own framework, makes so much sense. And I actually have a client right now, and we're using that framework as well for them to uncover their purpose. So it's very simple and very clear, and it helps frame up action.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up now, I think one thing, to listeners and viewers who may be, kind of thinking about their own sense of purpose, are there any antidotes from your own, life journey so far to get to this clear purpose that you could share with people as they're seeking their own?
Yeah, I think again, I'm way more focused on the actioning of it, right? Because I think actually the finding of it, it's more of a revelation process. I don't think people, I call it purpose anxiety. You know, people are like, I need to find my purpose. Like, is it in this cabinet? Is it in this cabinet? And I think that that's you know, as humans, as Americans, we over dramatize and overcomplicate. So a few things. One that I often send people back to is from Echoing Green, and Laura Galinsky, who's a purpose absolute guru, brilliant thinker for decades. And one of the exercises that they had was to think about the things in your inbox, right? And which are the emails that you're like, oh yeah, let me get back to this one, right? And whether is that making a connection? Is that opining on a political issue? Is that, you know, offering someone a job? Is that coaching someone on their performance? Is it giving edits on a power, whatever? Versus the emails that you're like, oh, I'll do that next week, you know, and now are 9 weeks old and still lurking in the inbox, right? And so I think that that's a very kind of modern, timely way. Of course, another thing that a lot of purpose exercises do is go back to childhood, right? Like we don't change fundamentally all that much in some ways. And so what did you love to do? What were your hobbies? What were those days when, you know, time went by and you were the happiest you've ever been on this planet? So I think thinking back to some of those things and not trying to overcomplicate it is a powerful place to start. And then in some of my Forbes articles, and again, I can share a follow-up, I include a formula for purpose, right? Which is what you care about making happen, or the solution you care about contributing to, for whom, by doing what, right? And so kind of so what, for whom, how, and just write it. Like
Yeah.
set a timer, 45 seconds, write something down and live with it for a week. It's not going to go on your tombstone. It's not going to go, you know, it doesn't have to go on your LinkedIn yet, but just put something down
Yeah.
and play with it and read it to your best friend or read it to your dog or to yourself and see how it sounds, you know, and see
And
what
does it
that means.
resonate? I think it's
And
because a lot of this is about, you know, hitting here, right? As you say, we haven't changed a lot since we were kids, and you know, this isn't some massive, you know, I think we hold up the people who have had impact in history as like we have to all be that, but you started it by saying, you know, this is really about your sphere of influence and like, you know, just doing what you can.
totally. And play, you know, really like lighten it up a little bit. It's so easy to get down in the mire of, oh my God, the oceans and the refugees and the Afghans and the humans and the neighbors and like, yes, but if we don't start a little lighter again with what we can do with what brings us joy, even if it's through that muck, I think that that's also a problem. And the you know, there's not one human, I think at least a third of the 110 interviewees, if not more, talked about the silence and the pause that's important for this, right? And so whether it's one actually really cool example is Mark Spencer, who runs Summer Search, which is helping kids from underrepresented and under-resourced backgrounds get to college and career. And they spend a lot of money offering these transformational summer experiences for kids to travel abroad because he had that experience as a kid and it changed his life, right? And so
As it does.
as it does, you know, and obviously a gap year or a wandering 6 months is an amazing thing. It is a privilege if you're not a Summer Search kid or you know, otherwise somehow resourced to do that. But just meditation, right? Or 10 minutes of silence, or people talked about their walks at lunch, or, you know, it can be really basic, but there needs to be some silence and some protection and boundaries from the shoulds. Instagram says you should do this and feel this, you know,
I
your
think
boss says your
that's
purpose should be
I
this.
think this silence and the pause. I've been, as you know, been kind of like purporting this for quite a while, and I couldn't agree more. And it is the purpose of meditation, right? I mean, and we're all finding, and science is finding that that's has a lot of value. So,
Yeah,
thank you, Nell, for sharing your
so welcome.
incredible wealth of knowledge on the subject of purpose and the future of how we get there, frankly, and how we have impact.
Yep. Amen. So welcome. Thank you for the time. And XYZ is such a brilliant series of thinkers and thoughts. So thank you for building it.
Thank you so much. And everyone watching and listening, if you don't already know where to find us, because you haven't somehow, I don't know how you're here, but please subscribe on YouTube. You can also subscribe anywhere you get podcasts, from Apple and Amazon to Spotify and beyond. Follow us on Instagram at Future of XYZ. And if you want to nominate a guest, you can visit future-of.xyz and let us know. We look forward to seeing you next week. And again, Nell, thank you for sharing your insights on the future of purpose.
So welcome. Thanks, Lisa.